Welcome back to Side Quest. This is our third exploration of Final Fantasy VII, and today we had the opportunity to go through Aeris' house as well as Sector 6 and into Don Corneo's Wall Market, where we saw Tifa taken in very odd garb, says Aeris. But before I move forward and give the introduction to today, please let me introduce again our very enigmatic Mr. Vincent Reese, as well as our well-studied Wesley Schantz. Welcome back, guys.
Hello, hello.
Howdy.
All right, and so I asked the guys today whether I could lead with something, because something I think everybody who listens to this will know, given that we're going to have a little bit of emotion on this show, and I think that's very important that we share our emotions, not only how we felt and sort of a nostalgic sense in relation to this game. Obviously, it imprinted on our souls, and that is why we continue to talk about it and think about it 20 years since we played it. But also we experience some emotion when we talk to each other, particularly when we have arguments. And so we had sort of a perennial argument via text message this week. And I imagine that that's not going to sound like a very odd thing to hear to most people listening now, just given how ubiquitous messaging people through text in a quick manner, whether it be email or IM, which is now a dated term, I imagine, and text messaging. And without having the actual person there with, like, say, their particular nervous system in direct contact or semi-direct contact with you, it is so easy just to get bogged down in words and in intellectual disputes. But what our dispute was about was how one progresses through the game as a hero. And as one progresses as a hero in relation to party members who share your overarching goal, and that seems to split the game into protagonist, party members, and NPCs. And so what the debate seemed to hinge around was the idea that humans have selective attention, where a very famous expression of that is the invisible gorilla task, where humans are asked to count the number of times the white team passes a ball, which is like 16, but they fail to notice the gorilla that walks into the middle of the screen and beats its chest. And even if you do see that, you don't notice that the curtain changes colors and that one of the players on the black team left.
What?
Yeah. So you can only notice that when you're primed, because you see in accordance with your goals. And so our argument sort of hinged around me making the claim that it was scientifically agreed upon now that we perceive reality in accordance to what we are attempting to do at that time. And perhaps if you've ever screamed bloody murder at a perfect stranger who cut you off in a car, you have some evidence of that. Or if you've ever cursed God because some coffee or water has been spilled onto you, thus ruining your goal of being impressive or perceived as anything but a slob for the rest of the day, then perhaps you have some insight into that. And so the claim that Vince was making was that, well, couldn't it be the case that each NPC is a hero within a story we don't see? And I think that's clearly true. But I think that they are represented as NPCs, non-player characters, within the scope of a game, precisely because they have an inessential role to what you are focusing on. And so it's perfectly possible that you're seeing people go through different games. And in fact, something rather sad, seeing the character of number 2, who seems to be poisoned in the same way that Avalanche would say that the world is being poisoned, which I think the movie Advent Children gives evidence for. So I think that suggests that some people are not doing so well in their journeys throughout that particular world. And perhaps that gives us some insight into why we follow Cloud around. Perhaps he just embodies the role of hero best in this way. But I did want to connect this also in sort of an emotive way to our project, which is part of my evidence for believing that each person perceives himself as a hero with party members around them, and thus draws people into contact with them by sharing goals, which I believe is the Christian message, where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there I am. It is that you two were once my friends, and we had similar goals of trying to graduate from St. John's, and then we went our separate ways. And now, during this project that Wes and I have been spearheading, it seems we're drawing people back into our lives in a different and yet similar way. And now we're sharing goals with Sarah Miller again, Oscar Ortiz, you, Wes, several of your friends who you've invited on, and we're drawing them back into the party. So it's as if people start as NPCs, but then when you have a goal, you then draw people towards you with similar goals and form a party. And that's the basis for friendship. And that throughout life, as your goals change, so do the people you're associating with. And so does the nature of the connection with those people change. But it seems as if you can layer it too. If somebody wants a friend, seems all the more ready to come on another journey with you. And so it's as if we've already played Final Fantasy VII, but we're playing Final Fantasy VII Part 2 now. Get the game back together. Here comes another level.
So poetic.
So good afternoon, gentlemen.
I think that fits the question about NPCs, but it seemed like it was also a question about the discussion itself that Vince was asking. Like, so like, what are we really doing here?
Yes.
I think you answered both those questions by kind of drawing them together like that. And it's a provisional answer. Like, of course, I think the best way to do it is to just continue talking, and that's where the theory will sort of emerge more clearly as we get more kind of practice at this. That's my opinion. But
yeah, and I think something interesting is that we really had devolved into an argument. And I don't think it was a particularly productive argument for some time. But what we did manage to do is to cool off and then start asking each other questions and start taking each other's view. And I think Vince, you actually did that much better than I did. And I think it sort of helped that I said it was my first week back teaching and that I had continued the argument during my 6th period on the 5th day in a row.
Oh, dude, you were doing that during school?
Yeah, so I was like upset in my classroom. That's why I was so short with you. But see, I think that's precisely the thing. Even though these are two of my best friends with whom I share goals and provisionally a goal of becoming world famous thinkers for doing this sort of thing, I was willing to destroy all of that just because in an irritated mood, I could draw the Masamune and try and sever everything. And I just think that's so interesting that is precisely why discourse and giving your friends or the party members the benefit of the doubt is so important. Because even with your friends, you will stop listening at a time, and you have to take a moment to pause and reflect and come back to what your goals actually are. And if we get to a point as a people or where we can no longer speak to each other, how is it that we can treat or discern the difference between a friend and someone who's not a friend?
Yeah.
It seems as if what makes somebody a friend is precisely the capacity to hash things out with words. And so
yeah, I'm constantly just reminded of, like, speaking of this will be a correlation to the period that we went through in the game today with the gym, all the dudes.
Yes. I just got there, so let's not go beyond there. I thought that was so funny, such a dig at gyms. It's like,
yeah, dude, totally homoerotic.
Things like that. What do you mean a lot of people? Strong people? In shape people? Yeah. This is like not well. I'm gonna forget another Russian writer's name. What is the name of the beat poet who every like 20-year-old says is his favorite poet from Russia?
Are you talking about Ginsberg?
Not Ginsberg. I don't think he's Russian.
A Russian beat,
sort of foul-mouthed.
Bukowski.
Yeah, exactly right. And this is a trigger warning. This is actually from one of his poems. But he says he's like, gym worker out at 2 a.m. What are you, a faggot? And I'm not condoning that sort of language at all, but so much as saying that connection was present not only by a Russian poet, but also seemingly in Japan as well.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing focusing on your appearance so much, man? And so I just want to say that I think this wall market and the whole notion of Aeris wanting to help out Cloud no matter what, and the dream sequence where he sees his mother and she says, you should find somebody who should take care of you. And of course, you find the cover material in Aeris' garden, which has 2 waterfalls going down.
Is that her vagina?
Idyllic place. We can maybe talk about what that means later. But the idea seems to be that there's a changing idea of what makes a man in this section of.
So can I riff on that?
Go ahead.
So one thing that I learned in my 2 months and $4,000 in China were the two characters for man and woman. And those two characters appear on the outside, respectively, of the gym and the brothel.
Oh, that is a fine connection, Vince. That is worth $4,000.
Yeah, absolutely. Just so I can go podcast with it.
Is not a gym sort of an embodiment not only of a desire for health, but of a masculine desire for beauty as well? Do you think that's why it's being made fun of in sort of a puerile fashion as being homosexual in nature?
I was wondering if perhaps in that way, yes, but on a broader maybe characterization, that this wall market seems to be sort of a place of maybe, not going to get the exact phrase that I want, but sort of a hyperbole of certain human actions and characteristics. So we have like the greed that Don Corneo is sort of embodying, but we also have this hyperbolic idea of masculinity in this gym characterized by this this working out, this fetishization of the human male body. And then we also have corresponding to it a sort of saying hyperbole, of the female. And both of those, because of the presentation that they are in Wall Market, the writers, the creators of this game, maybe they didn't even put this together, although I think the craft is there and they did, were trying to point that they're trying to show us that these are sort of, I can't remember the damn word, but I'll keep using hyperboles of human functions, human roles, maybe, because I know that we are trying to discuss this in an archetypal format in line with roles. So are these pathological roles that we are encountering?
Well, I might wonder, I think that's an excellent question, but I might wonder if they're even accretions of or they are accretions of particular behaviors that have been molded into a general form that all can recognize because all partake of them in some way or another. Ooh. And if that has some, if that has any meat to it, and Wes, I don't want to put you on the spot with this question because I just thought it up. So, it might be a tough one to answer, but I'm wondering if the fact that both the male form and female form as form is fetishized in this wall market, if the commentary is sort of that we do not simply exist in a time of exploitation of the feminine form, but of the male form as well, that we're not simply exploiting during this me or advertising or image-driven age just the female, but the male as well. We're exploiting humans, not just one gender.
Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly when you remember playing this like as a kid, as an adolescent, not a man or a woman yet per se, but just sort of in the path there. Then it's especially disorienting to come to this part of the game where you're asked to see these roles at their exaggerated, hyperbolic extreme, and then be told that you're going to cross-dress, right? To get it. So you have to sort of immediately blend them and fill this completely different role that is funny. I think is like the point of it is the way it's presented. Like Aeris is sort of cackling because she's getting one over on Cloud here. Cloud seems really, really uncomfortable with it the whole way. And as the player, you're sort of left in limbo, like how seriously to take this. You can actually go into the honeybee rooms. It's not like a required element of the little journey in Wall Market, but you can actually do it. And you see some like very, very upsetting scenes in there, which I had completely forgotten if I ever did see them as a kid, like how disturbing they were.
So I couldn't do that because I'm a cuck and I don't have my PlayStation or my game yet.
Okay.
Could you describe some of the things that were in there?
Well, right before you do that, Wes, let me just make a comment. I want to come to that in a second, but it's funny because I have not done that. So it's funny how you can sort of guide your journey by just what you happen upon or what you light upon, I think is the best way of putting that. But I also wanted to ask you whether you thought that might have the fact that there's this sort of gender confusion in this game, and that there are these overdone representations of the lascivious element of woman as perceived by man, and also as man perceived by, I guess, man who's attracted to man. That the idea is that in our culture, since we have sort of an exaggerated or hyperbolic view, or that we have allowed our view of what is male or female to become perhaps so one-sided and hyperbolic that instead of attempting to fix that image, we deny that image and try and mix them together. That creates tremendous and profound confusion for a young person. And that perhaps what you see in Don Corneo's mansion, like what you can see on any internet porn site, is the chimeric reflection of that confusion, of the mixing together of that which should be kept at poles to maintain a tension between what is real.
Hold on, my phone shook. So with that, it sounds like there is a recognition that these two poles are, as they're presented in Wall Market, are pathological. They're not healthy representations. Is that correct to take from the statement of what
even if the actual embodiments could be healthy, how they are perceived at that moment, and specifically by Wall Market, is pathological, yes. And thus there's a solution sought that is potentially the wrong solution because the diagnosis is wrong. The diagnosis is that the very ideas of masculine and feminine, because of how we've perceived them and perhaps portrayed them, are wrong and false. Whereas I think the appropriate diagnosis is we have been portraying them incorrectly and we should figure out what they really are. And that those lead to very different actions.
So then the sort of solution, the provisional, perhaps not the best solution, is this intermixing that Cloud does in order to infiltrate Don Corneo and then to also attempt to topple him in the mansion.
Well, how do you take Don Corneo as a figure? He's sort of a slumlord, right? So he's a prevailing sort of archetypal figure of the system as it is.
I'd like to, at the beginning of this right here, I just want to draw out a physical presentational semblance between Don Corneo and Mr. Shinra. They both have blonde hair. They both have white Oxfords on. They both have red power suits.
So another negative portrayal of the patriarchal father. And as if that is all men in some way, and that is the man that Cloud, as the puer aeternus, or the eternal child, running from who he actually is towards ethereal and magical images of the feminine, like Aeris, who is a flower girl amongst the slums and a creature from another world / ancient race who you can choose over Tifa, who is very real though flawed, which I actually did. In this case, I actually wanted to ask you about that, and I really did have some feelings when Aeris asks, "Who's Tifa, your girlfriend?" and you have the chance to say "No way" or "Yeah, that's right." I could never have, and I think this shows perhaps some growth on my part in the past, have chosen against Aeris. She would have been the next best thing, and I think that's part of the difference between a childish and an adult perspective on relationship. That Aeris represents the new anomalous girl who's magical, as opposed to the one you already know who seems as known territory with all her flaws who has a real past.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of provisionally how I've been understanding Aeris, as sort of the anima, or the sort of bloated figure of the feminine that an underdeveloped man called a puer aeternus would have, that he attempts to marry because she is perfect and fantastic and keeps him from life, rather than Tifa. And my evidence was that cover materia is in her home. She lives in an Edenic environment, and to amplify
which is like
that,
completely absurd within the city. Like there's
That's
50
exactly
foot
right.
waterfalls.
It's like I take it as like sort of the diamond in the rough as an archetype, as you can project that onto any place. And so probably that's actually just a slum as well, and probably she's not as magical as a real person as how we see her perceived. But as a projection of the anima, she is perfect, as just like Calypso in the Odyssey, who offers Odysseus immortality and an easy life for all eternity with the most beautiful woman alive, in which he turns away from in order to be with you, in order to suffer and have to fight until he dies.
Well, that's one thing I might not fully agree with right now, just because Aeris isn't. We might have these Edenic presentations of Aeris, these overly feminine presentations, which are of course going to be associated with a sort of motherly caring instinct. But we also see that she rejects the sort of path that would be ascribed to someone wanting to do that to Cloud. She pushes Cloud to come onto this journey. She sort of gets in a hissy.
I agree. The one thing I would say is perhaps that makes her also a figure of the positive anima.
Yeah.
That she leads him into life as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess
the psychopomp that you were talking about.
Yeah, yes, and I think that is what the anima does, right? Any woman you do not know, so say the Jungians, and this is Piagetian as well, you project an image onto, because you have to have a basic way to interact with a person.
Yeah.
And so it's a very general idea. And then as you come to know the person, you cut away at that. But as you cut away from that, what are you cutting away? That's the figure of the anima that you then replace with the real person.
So I go ahead?
Yeah. No, go on.
I just because we're going to have nerd readers who are going to want to sit in their basements and read. I just want to
possibly 1,000 years.
Yeah, yeah, possibly for 1,000 years. I just want to throw out some book titles if they're interested in this idea of the puer. Two that come to my mind are going to be Maria Louise von Franz, sort of treatment of the puer. She uses both the Le Petit Prince and also this German work that... Have you still been looking for this? Because I still can't find it.
I would love to find it just because I want to find the boys.
Yes. It's called Das Reich ohne Raum, The Kingdom Without Space. And she has this very powerful treatment of both of those. So the text would be her treatment of that. I forget what it is called.
Puer Aeternus.
Puer Aeternus, yes. Thank you. So the book she reviews, Das Reich ohne Raum, Le Petit Prince, which has a very readily available English translation, but also The Golden Ass by Apuleius, which is a phenomenal work from, I think, the 1st or 2nd century. It's just completely profane.
Well, let me pause you there, because I think I can do something.
It's great. Go ahead.
I think we can do some good with what you're saying, because what it seems like you're suggesting is, if the process of moving through a hero's journey is a process of individuation, then at certain moments you have a chance to either progress or regress.
Mm-hmm.
And that what the golden ass of Apuleius represents, and that the protagonist becomes an ass until he finds essentially God and is turned back into a man and a divine man at that. I amplify that with the Circe episode of the Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Where the men are turned into swine in the presence of Circe because of their failure to move to the next level, whereas Odysseus, helped by the psychopomp Hermes, is the only one who comes out better and thus improves his companions through his example. And I suggest that Cloud here, as opposed to Don Corneo, is the man going on to the next step, as represented by the figure of the hero, where Don Corneo and every other man in that wall market is sort of represented as the swine or pigs that men can become when they fall short and go to Pleasure Island and become brain asses like in Pinocchio. That when you deny the spiritual for the sensual, that you focus on the lowest form of the feminine and fail to progress to the next level in life, which is to be able to care not simply for simple pleasures, but to take responsibility for one's relationships to real people around us.
So what then? So how far have you gotten, Schmied? Have you completely cross-dressed? What's that?
I just got to the gym scene, so I've just gotten my dress in. I need to get my wig from the guys who are so like me at the gym.
Are you going full out? Are you looking good? You looking pretty? What have you got so far?
I haven't been able to see that yet. I just got there, but right now I'm wearing I'm wearing a phone in my ear, and so
you gotta go silky and shimmery. Make sure that you go silky and shimmery, because that's important. If you don't do that, you can't win.
Don't lose.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I think I did soft and shiny. So dang it.
Oh,
so what did I just lose?
Save points.
Well, I think it's the connection I was going to make off of the turning into an ass thing is bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Go on.
Yeah. So
maybe
the thing that I thought was interesting about Aeris's plan here to get Cloud to dress up as a girl is that you can see it as both Cloud seeing things from the feminine perspective, right? And so getting that experience and then making him more able to move on to his next stage of development, sort of thing. But you can also see it as Aeris in kind of a puckish way, just around, just like having fun, because what fools these mortals be, right? Like just she is so, this time through, I have a harder time reading her because she seems so demonic in a way, just like messing around and his feelings and everyone else's feelings. So yeah, I think you could see it both ways. Like I said, that I prefer to see it as, Cloud is forced to confront the feminine experience in a new way. He sort of like gains knowledge from this, but you can see it the other way too, that it's like him going through a nightmare, a phantasmagoric dream.
Well, and if the way that humans perceive reality is the same way in which a hero progresses through a game, then I don't think it's inappropriate to suggest, given how one's particular path is going at some time, that it is a dream or a nightmare. In fact, we do speak in that way, right? This is a nightmare. Please wake me up. When will this end? We talk in that sort of language, right? And so it's as if we encapsulate our experiences and the moments in our lives within narratives in the same way that dreams are encapsulated within or presented as narratives. And that she might be sort of a spiritual figure, I think, is also supportive of the idea that she is the union anima, and that which is spiritual can be embodied by multiple or many people, and all men, in order to perceive a woman before they know them, have to project that figure of the anima. And so I think there are just different, potentially even just different words for the same thing, and just different ways to describe the same phenomenon, like you're saying, which is part of what we were talking about with just the nature of this discourse, right? So like you and I have directly addressed on our podcast, we sort of lecture and podcast in a different way from, say, how our professors of philosophy would have. Rather than starting from an initial principle and deducing from that, we sort of start with a question, and then we begin to amplify on it. And we make as many connections as possible to something, to an experience that we have, in order to understand what the essence of that experience is, rather than attempting, say, to criticize what the experience is by not seeing the entire constellation, but taking each particular piece out from that constellation and speaking of it as if it is alone that which is real, which is literally what to criticize from crenane to cut away means.
What? Etymology lesson.
Yeah, I had a pretty expensive education too. So,
yeah, can we just say how much we're in debt right now?
I think people will get that from the fact that we're doing a podcast. So I just have a couple more. Or Wes, did you have something you wanted to do? Yeah, go, please.
The gym is an interesting spot because that's one of the by the dressmaker. He's like, hey, like if this is gonna work, you're gonna need a wig. I know some guys who can help you with that. They hang out, right? But there's other places in Walmart that you are not told about, but that you can go and like Vince was saying, you can get fully equipped to go to Don Corneo. So this is an interesting sort of element of this game where there's stuff beyond what you really need to do to progress that you can do, and it's like what Aeris is doing in a way, right? The joking around side, like you can do this thing just for the fun of it, just to see what happens if you push it to its extreme, so you get to sort of play her role in a way here and doll Cloud up more than necessary just to see what will happen.
And for those of you who have already played the game, you see what happens when you go all out, when you're looking good. You get control of the game. Instead of being put into some side holding room while either Tifa or Aeris are chosen instead. Right. So maybe what I'm seeing, something to take away from this is, in some cases, the power that can come from when you take a game seriously as a game. Like playing along with all these sort of created rules that maybe this psychopomp higher being has created. You take it seriously, but it's still a game.
I'll bring it home. So that would mean that the purpose of the game, or the reward for playing a game through to the highest level, is that you get closest to embodying the ideal, and are thus given the most attention by people. And that's why we call celebrities stars. Bang.
Wow. So actually, another thing that I think this might be related to is by treating the game as a game and taking it seriously. We also discussed in our secret group discussions, the Inner Sanctum,
the unconscious to this consciousness.
Yes. The ability to do multiple save points, in which we aren't taking this reality or this game as the full reality, but partaking in it as the game. It has rules that we can sort of bend within and around, especially when it comes to choosing multiple scenarios or outcomes. And Alex, I just want to sort of open the floor up to your musings on that, because I thought that was a really interesting some connections that you made with that.
Well, I made some connections originally. So let me just document my original experience playing the game. I originally did that because I was so enamored of Sephiroth and how powerful he was, and the fact that he was level 50 and I was level 1, and he could do 3,000 damage, and I could do like 5 damage, and he was a master of everything, and
he was
not pro, and he could take no damage. So he was a perfect projection of the older brother, or area of proximal development, that which is perfect. So even if he was not perfect, as far as Cloud was concerned, he was. And so I was taken by that part of the game, and so I made a save there. But when I make these multiple saves, I do feel sort of a pinch of ethics, possibly like how somebody who did those choose your own story goosebumps were, because I feel like I'm not being true to a single narrative, sort of like I'm cheating on somebody by leaving the ground open so that I can pursue different storylines, even though I'm not starting the game over, as if I'm not fully committing to one narrative and trying to leave my options open. It's as if I not dissolve, but or diminish. But what is the word we use for to water? It's as if I'm watering down the experience. But there's good reason to do it as well as a scholar of this game at this point, because exploring different options, of course, gives me a fuller view of what's happening. And so my idea was that sort of what starts off as sort of a stealing or an immoral act or a sort of hermetic or Promethean act of theft is what leads to mastery, because it's precisely because it opens your mind up to those additional experiences you would not otherwise have seen, that your consciousness is expanded to the point where you have a wider view or perspective of what the game actually is. Again, a perspective more like that of the designer of the game, because you see more of what's there than of the simple player of the game, the person who goes along the prescribed path that's laid out and sticks by their choices. So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. I think I've tried to save here, particularly because there's certain things you can't redo. Like if you mess it up the first time when you're doing the squat contest, you don't get another chance. Like you just get whatever wig that they give you. So it's always a good idea to be able to go back again and try it over again. So there's that element too. Like even if you're looking at it just linearly, there's certain parts of the game that you can't do over again. I think that's what you're describing with this Cloud and Sephiroth being a team part. Like that's just a certain part in the game you can't go back to once you pass it.
And it actually sort of disheartened at this moment, because in my hurry to get to where you guys are, I seem to have made some irrevocable mistakes.
No. You fucked up, so, Alex.
It's true. And so we'll have to see. Well, I guess then this game will be like life, and when you miss chances to embody the ideal, you do not get those chances back. This is something I talked with Wes about at his wedding. I think a lot of young people these days, because of many of the fantastic stories like Final Fantasy VII I grew up with, was sort of disenchanted with this world. We don't have talking tigers or flying dragons. Though of course we do. Those are just symbols that I was too stupid to understand at the time. What we do, and sorry that I made that funny comment, but
no, it was good. I loved it.
But what we do have are specific moments that do exist that we can make more or less special, sort of like how you guys were talking about playing the game to the highest level. Like you have your high school graduation and possibly your college graduation, and maybe you get engaged and then you get married, and maybe you have a child and there's a birth, and then they go to school for the first time, and then they win their first sports game. And it's like all these moments exist as potential most special moment of your life. And I think what I would get hung up on is the fact that these are shared experiences, that everybody gets to have these experiences. But there's an illogic to that perspective, because if that made my personal experiences worse, wouldn't I hate Final Fantasy VII precisely because of how many people share in their love of it?
Yeah, that's part of why so many people hate this game, honestly. Like it's considered overrated for the very thing you're describing, right? The thing that so many people like it, so many people hate it also. It seems like they go hand in hand.
I mean, go ahead, Wes, sorry.
No, that was kind of trailing off.
I will say that I do have sometimes with video games in particular, and many other things in general, a sort of classist approach to it. Like when I hear people playing video games, I imagine like big, thick neck beards and fedora wearing fucks. And I'm like, that's not me. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to sit in my room and think about driving my motorcycle, because I can't, because it's broken. But nonetheless, sometimes I use that as a reason to not maybe engage in these sometimes thought of as lower forms of art or human creation. But I mean,
and I would say that's precisely the problem of our sort of hipster, cynical generation.
Oh yeah, I am the token hipster.
No, I mean, not to bash on you, but to say that it is precisely because we are doubting the value of the things which do have meaning in life that we turn up our noses at the most meaningful experiences of our life, thinking that since they aren't perfectly unique to us, we shouldn't engage in them. Whereas the real art of life is to try and engage with them as well as possible. It's like, so if everybody goes out on Fridays, it doesn't make you any happier or your life any more meaningful just to not go out, like you said. Then you just define yourself by negation. You are like Nietzsche's last man. But if you attempt to embody the ideal, you attempt to have as much fun as possible, to dress well, be charming, and have a good time, it is almost as if you become a figure out of story, and that manifests itself in having a meaningful experience. And that perhaps part of the sort of purpose of life is to have meaningful experiences that you can then convey and share with people in the form of narrative so that they can have them too.
Well, to put like a really old stodgy amplification on this, you have the phrase in Theaetetus, does he speak Greek? Is there this commonality of language that we can then use to explore what the heck this diagonal in a square is? Now that's much more high-minded, but I sort of want to bring it down in that you also need to have common experiences, which is sort of a banal thing to say, but just to bring the full format out, the full idea, you also need to have common, shared, not maybe exemplary experiences if you are going to interact with people. Comedy, I think, is a way that happens, especially with the niche rise in comedy that we get in internet culture. You can have
pause you on that.
Yeah,
I think you hit on something golden, which is, I think that's precisely also the trouble with what's happening in the world right now. That since we are now doubting the commonality of language and suggesting that each person's experience is completely individual, and thus they can use whatever terms to refer to themselves, defined in whatever ways they wish to refer to themselves.
Yeah. Really quick, my pronoun is caballero.
Very good, caballero. Yeah, horseman. And then linguist, of course. And just kidding. And that what we are denying to ourselves by denying classification, even that which is scientifically verified across many, many, many dimensions, like gender, of course, would be that we're denying ourselves the capacities to live the most meaningful lives that have ever existed. Because we have access to the most profound health, the most goods, the most stories ever. We should be able to put together the most sophisticated games to bring out the most interesting experiences and interesting parts of humans ever. And I think that's part of the point of a game and life, to explore yourself in relation to others in order to understand what a human is. And that when we turn away from these experiences, we turn away from the point of being a human, which is to explore the world specifically through what the world is, which is social for humans, and thus to explore oneself through exploring relations and problems with others.
So you had this phrase that I forget the first time you told it to me, Alex, but it kicks in my head a lot. It's that these truths aren't hidden in this day and age. They're on the internet. They are simply, people simply do not look for them. You put it much more eloquently, but whatever. This sort of overflow of information, this huge access that we have, people typically think that, I'm going to rephrase that. There's several large groups of people who think because we have all this information, we are therefore smarter. But there's also this lack of reading it and analyzing it and bringing it into yourself. So to make like a personal expansion on this, I work at a bookstore in a geriatric retirement town, and I have this old walking colostomy bag come up to me and say, when they put chips in our head, we'll be able to understand everything. Essentially just saying that once we have Google inside of our head, we will become a omniscient God.
And so what you, I think, are suggesting is that it's not the amount of information we have access to, and Wes, I want your idea on this too, but rather the logos we use in order to pick out that relevant information so that we can make connections between it. That you could give the opposite of, you could give 1,000 monkeys 10 million years and some typewriters and they could make Shakespeare. The idea is actually, if you give a fool all the gold in the world, they will never keep it. If you give somebody all the information in the world and they lack the logos necessary, the attention necessary to connect the dots themselves, they will remain in a state of identification with the herd, which is believing that they know everything that their society knows, while in actuality, as an individual, they know practically nothing. Well, and that seems to be what Socrates
also knows. That they in fact think they know better than their society. I mean, we have
yes,
the rise
of course,
of unironic flat earthers. We have this QAnon bullshit that's happening. We have Pizzagate, Comet Ping Pong, all of these things that gain traction and momentum in this collective unconscious of the internet, that's allowed because of the vast connections that can be made. And yet you do have this sort of lamentation by certain members of society that there is a lack of critical thinking, perhaps maybe a trust in the past, or maybe just a trust in thinking and listening to others. I'm not going to stick with that analysis. But
well, no, what do you think of that, Wes? I don't think that's bad at all.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk to people who think differently from me, but I agree that there comes a point where if you're going to talk to someone at all, you have to have a certain basis of shared language. I think that's the analogy with Greek, right? From the dialogue there, like, yeah, in order to speak to this person, whatever their station, whatever their past experience, there is a certain language, literal or figurative, which you've got to have in common. And I think the argument that we would make is that there is such a language, and it's basically that of being a person, right? Like a person who has a body, who has the capacities to use reason, whether they choose to accept that or not. Like that is actually like a kind of a biological basis type of argument. But you could look at it from the other side too.
An essentialist argument, they would call it.
Yeah, like you could say too that there's such a thing as logos, and say that is maybe not reducible to a biological basis, and that could be a point of more or less importance for you, like theologically or metaphysically or whatever. But regardless, right, like there is a certain basis of speech and decorum which you gotta be able to have in order to have the conversation. That's right. Hittable. Like that's not too difficult to meet.
You need a field on which to play. Yeah. And so I think we have countless historical examples, and my favorite one is this. Of course, we've talked about this, Wes, and what it takes to start something, and what it takes, to connect to those who are willing to make something with you, so as to be, a star within a constellation, and not the North and Lonely Star. But the idea of Thucydides, where he was once taken to task, where a man said, and I'm probably a cretin, but that might be a projection on my part too, that Thucydides, had you not been an Athenian, you would not be the great general that people know you as. Thucydides heard this and thought for a moment, and then responded in typical Athenian fashion, that may be true, but even had you been an Athenian, you would not have been the general I am. Suggesting that, yes, it is true that I did not make the field on which I play or give myself all that it is I have, that I do to some extent, like a character within a game, find myself embodied with certain qualities that I did not choose. But the sum of what I am is the choices I make in conjunction with that. And so you can't simply reduce me to that which is not my choice, and thus disregard that which is.
I'm going to bastardize this philosophical concept, but that sort of sounds like a very maybe infantile stage or proto-philosophical idea of Heidegger's and the existentialist idea of thrownness,
yes,
of being thrown into the world.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, one finds oneself in most stories starting in media res, right? So Heidegger was just taking an epic concept there, and so it's not a very difficult one.
And becoming a Nazi.
And so, and something we do in this podcast, particularly what I think Wes and I have been doing, is demystifying some of these thinkers. Thrownness means you as a subject or as an object were thrown into something. Just like when you start any story, like an epic, it starts in the middle. So you find yourself where you are, and then you go. And that's precisely how this story starts as well. And so, I think everybody can understand that sort of idea, and that it's a good idea, and that you shouldn't quibble about it for 50 years and think you haven't made any progress because perhaps you've built your career on quicksand.
So maybe something, just the way you phrased the idea had this pop into my mind. There's another great thinker who we've inherited much of these sort of ideas and thought structures from, and that would be Locke. And Locke has this idea of a sort of blank slate of humanity, the tabula rasa. And I might not be thinking this all the way through, but it seems as if this idea of thrownness, of this inheritedness, could be at odds with this idea of the blank slate, this human being coming into the world without any prior predispositions.
Well, that's one that I'm just going to have to footnote here. Steven Pinker wrote
a book. No, we can totally footnote that.
Well, no, just footnote it because Steven Pinker blasted that idea out of existence 15 years ago in his work, The Blank Slate. It's a sophisticated work of experimental psychology. It's published by Penguin. Nobody who has studied anything believes that anymore because it's simply not true.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, The Blank Slate is a horrific idea. But it does seem there are ideas, I think, derivative from that we forget are traced back to that.
Now that's a good connection, because those also, like weeds, need to be burned as well, because the initial roots are dead. And that tabula rasa idea, now that we've progressed so far experimentally, we just simply know it's not true. We come with basic preset motivational systems. We represent them by gods as Olympians. We unified that through understanding that the logos can functionalize and hierarchize our motivational states so that we can move in conjunction with the highest good. And so we know this. Bang. I don't see a lot of point in any scholars in any disciplines attempting to argue that. They just need to look at the experimental data. And that's something we're doing here too, right? We, like a fire, in a controlled way, opposite to the irony of Fahrenheit 451, are burning away the dead twigs, the bad ideas that no longer have life, that are starting to suffocate our society. And like hoarders, we are keeping them around, and they are keeping us from leaving the original tree or room of our RPG starting point. And so we have to burn these away so that we can trudge a path forward through the dark wood that we find ourselves in. Yeah. And so, Wes, how should we close? Yeah, go on.
Well, I know you haven't quite got there yet, but when you're done with Don Corneo's, you're dropped into the sewers. I thought maybe we could. That's where I assumed that we would kind of get to at the end of this. So you'd mentioned the cover materia that you find in Aeris's backyard in her garden, and that's a pink materia. It's one that just does something without you having to take any further actions. Once you equip it, it just does it. But this yellow materia, this is your first yellow materia that you find in the sewers, which is the steel materia. And it adds a new ability to your list of actions in battle. So you actually gain a new thing you can do when you're facing your opponents. So that's what you find. That's what you find out in the sewers.
So you find. Oh, so just to give the Petersonian Jungian sort of amplification of that. So in the lowest place, the alchemical explanation, I guess, in the place of filth where the dung is, you find the gold that's hard to see. And that gives you the ability, like a psychopomp or like Bilbo Baggins or like one Promethean, to steal from others that which makes you that which will give you a higher perspective. It gives you the ability to learn from others in a physical way, it seems.
So
yeah.
So something to build off of this idea in the sewers is the boss that we meet there. Every like 30 minutes or so of just direct playtime, not say XP farming and doing side quests, you encounter a boss, it seems. And this boss is, I think, pretty interesting because it's the first mythological callback that we get in the game in something that we actually battle.
Oh yeah.
This guy's name is Ops, APS, and that is sort of a bastardization. I remember hearing that, like, that sounds really familiar. Where do I know that? Boom, I know that from Mesopotamian religion. Ops is a form of transliteration of the consort of Tiamat, Abzu. And these were two primordial deities that we can explore later. Also, I just don't have all of it at the front of my head right now to say.
It's anyway, okay, I do. Apsu represented fresh water, whereas Tiamat represented salt water. And the great light hero, Marduk, is the one who, with a net and I think trident, captured and bounded the salt water, or representation of the infinite, which is the great mother Tiamat, in order to project a new hierarchy or patriarchal system onto it, in order to create a field of play on that which would otherwise be chaos.
So we have Cloud as Marduk, not
across the Poseidon Sea.
I would say from this we can definitely begin to say that this is maybe a reordering by Cloud of an older system,
and starting at the bottom.
Yeah, you do start in the underground of these underground aquifers that Abzu represents, is the deification of.
So it's like a dissolutio or a negredo. It's a coming down to the waters gross and filthy below, a humiliation, a starting from the bottom, and we're still here. But I just want to, okay, so I do want to talk about that more next time after I've played that.
Absolutely.
And I do think that he actually uses a move. I forget if it comes later. Doesn't he use like a essentially a shitwave move?
Yes. Yeah, shitwave. That's the direct.
So he covers you in the filth, and that's deeply alchemical there, because the light of the logos is going to have to break you out of that, sort of like a chicken out of the egg, which is why a chicken is often represented in alchemy. Boom, because it gives you a wake-up call. Dang, I'm on fire today. Let's go. So one thing about the slums that I just wanted to bring up, because we know a little bit more about human dominance hierarchies now, and we understand now, and Peterson often references this literature, that when a hierarchy becomes too stilted and high, like a vertical wall that you cannot scale, that those at the bottom will often form their own hierarchies as manifested in reality by games. And they tend to compete in a violent way, because violence tends to be the best strategy to quickly move up in that sort of world, because you don't have a very high life expectancy because of the violence there. And so something about these slums is that what attacks you as you're going between 6 and 7 is a house.
Yes, that was fascinating. Tell me what you think.
I wondered whether y'all thought, like I did, that the idea behind what creates poverty, and actually Warren Farrell gives some evidence about this in both.
Did you say Will Ferrell?
Warren Farrell, the
brother of Will Ferrell.
So the former president of the National Organization for Women, who wrote The Boy Crisis. He gives some evidence that what you have to do in order not to be poor in America, which is interesting because it's a Japanese game, is not be a single mother who doesn't have a high school education, or excuse me, not have a baby as a single woman without getting a high school education, and suggesting that part of what creates poverty in a society is a broken home.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I thought that house that we battle might be a sort of small scale manifestation of the greater house that we are in, this Midgar, this city, this mandala construction that's also and we should really just have an entire podcast where we just investigate this idea of Midgar as mandala, because I think that's fascinating. We haven't had much time to talk about that.
That's right.
But this home, which presents itself initially in this very pinkish fashion, it has a very maybe maternal coloring scheme to it, and then all of a sudden it breaks out into a robotic monstrosity that attacks you. So there's this deceptive, there's this deceptive action of this house on potentially its own inhabitants, which was
the society itself.
Yes.
Like an Ouroboros, which is a circle, like a mandala.
Self-suck.
And Wes, what did you think about the house that attacks you in the slums?
Yeah. It's pretty striking because it's the first place that you go once you've escaped from Aeris's house, right? So in some way, it's like
you've had a dream about your old house too.
Yeah, right. Where your mom thinks that you should find an older girl, right?
Take care of
right.
Which I'm totally down for. God.
Well,
yes.
I guess that we've kind of figured it all out. I think that about sums up this episode, guys. Talking to you again soon. Good luck with that, Vince.
Yeah, I'm on Cougars Looking for Cubs. It's a great app. I'm actually a paid sponsor, so I'm plugging it right now. Everyone, go sign up. Tinder is so 2017. Get on Cougars for Cubs. It's the next wave.
Well, actually,
it's how you're gonna make it.
So it's so funny how wisdom comes from the fool, because I wondered also. I did wonder whether Cloud's mother's comment on there are many temptations and a lot of girls in the city, whether that was sort of a comment or a prefiguring of the temptations that would find themselves in our cities. And so, living in San Diego, where there are many communities all dispersed together with people rolling in and out, and with the proliferation of online dating, it's almost as if the social controls that once existed in order to push someone towards moral and normative behavior do not exist. And so there are
they're harder to reinforce.
That's a better way of putting it. And because of that, the city is a place like the forest now where you can get lost. And that I think is sort of what's happening with Cloud, and why we keep seeing, and now we've seen him for the first time sort of white out when he gives an answer that's a lie that he doesn't quite recognize as a lie to Aeris, when he gives his rank as soldier, which of course he never had.
Can I present a confusion that I had?
Yeah.
Yes, and Wes can answer it, and then we got to complete this thing.
Yeah. So Wes, my confusion was we have two flashbacks, or two liminal sort of presentations in the past, maybe two bosses. We have Cloud when he falls after fighting the Buster robot, whatever it is, and you have text that comes across the screen, not in a blue screen, but sort of just presented there, almost as if it is. I'm not going to describe it, but that's what it is. It's just there. And then we have that same presentation of text later. And what I was confused about is whether that initial text without the blue box in the second sort of liminal stage flashback is the same speaker as the mother, whose speech occurs in a blue bubble. So I was wondering if there's two speakers, if there's one, and what sort of problems that can open up for exploration.
Yeah, I think that the mother scene is kind of self-contained, and that the other voice is not your mother's, but is akin to it in that it's a voice, sort of a self from your past, who's not fully conscious at this point. What with Cloud, his current adventure, right? So, but part of this adventure is us like proceeding to find out more about this other voice that's in Cloud, and that's actually one of
nice
happens in Don Corneo's in the Honeybee Lounge. One of the rooms, if you go in, you'll see a ghost Cloud who talks to you.
What?
Yeah, no, you see, this is the part that I like. I don't think I ever knew this, but so one of the rooms in there, if you get the membership card from the guy with the white t-shirt in the bottom of the Sector 6 wall market, and then you go in, so you can choose one of these rooms. I think it's the upper left room that has this particular weird scene. I think there's a different weird scene if you choose the other room. But anyway,
it's Shinra as a king, I think.
Yeah, which is also terrifying.
Excellent.
Yeah, excellent. You got to do this before we talk next time, and we'll look at it.
Yeah, this is your homework, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely, because that was killer, Wes. And I guess what I could end with here, even though I said y'all can end, is just evidence for something Wes said earlier about shared experience making things better, because it looks like as we continue to share more and more experience, not only playing the game together, but talking about it live and publicly, and also hashing things out on our instant messenger unconsciously, as it were, it's like we're getting better and better every time the more that we share. So perhaps that says something about the meaning of life.
Whoa.
Well, let's keep exploring that, guys. Until next time.
Yeah, right on. Signing off.
Okay. Thanks. Take care.
See ya.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.